Hi everyone, and welcome to ETL's discussion panel today, Sustainable Business in a Post-Lockdown World. Thank you for joining. I'm Hannah Calliam and a sustainability graduate at ETL. ETL is a London-based SME, the owned subsidiary of Guy's and St Thomas's, and are invested back into the NHS. We're a team of sustainability professionals, and within ETL, we have people working across public and private sector in strategic estates development, healthcare strategy planning, capital development, and property consultancy. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our great panel today. So firstly, we have Marcus Lloyd-Davey, who is the Group Head of Estates and Facilities at Newham College, London. Marcus leads the strategic development of college's campus estate that supports teaching, learning and other activities across the college group. And secondly, we have Sean Mallon. Sean has been working at WWF since December 2018 as a climate change specialist, and he provides technical expertise surrounding climate change with a focus on corporate engagement and the campaign for net zero. And last but not least, we have Fiona Daly, who's the Sustainability and EFM Workforce Lead for NHS Improvement. Fiona is tasked with leading a national programme on sustainability within the NHS, driving innovation and engagement and providing NHS trusts with critical support to implement their sustainability programmes. So today's event will be approximately 45 minutes. And in today's webinar, we're going to have an ongoing discussion on what the sustainability landscape might look like after lockdown and what this means for businesses aiming to progress sustainability within their organisation. I have a few initial questions that I'd like to ask our panellists, but please send in your questions in the chat function within Teams. ETL are also undertaking a survey, so make sure to fill that out. That's in the chat box. And finally, just so you're aware, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available afterwards. So please tick anonymous if you don't want other participants to see your name when asking questions. OK, so during lockdown, we've obviously seen significant changes in our behaviours and a potential step change towards more sustainable lifestyles. One of the main points to note is how business as usual has definitely been challenged in a way that we're able to adapt rapidly and have proven how behaviour change is in practice much easier than we think under the right circumstances. Communities are coming together, supporting local, and everyone's slowed down and taken the time to appreciate the world we live in and things we may have taken for granted before. So during this time, sustainability has gained huge traction, with a number of global leaders taking this opportunity to push for a green recovery, learning from unprecedented times with the aim of building back better. So to kick off, after that quick overview from me, I'd like to start by asking the panel their top insight or their main lesson learned from lockdown relating to sustainability. So, Marcus, could we start with you?
Yes, certainly. When COVID first came about, I was looking at ways of trying to make my college campuses more sustainable. Now, I have over my 14 buildings, I have 12,000 students and about 800 staff. And one of the things that I noticed was that because of lack of investment from successive governments, that there wasn't an environmental tilt to the organisation when I turned up. So one of the big things I started looking at was lighting. Now, in modern society, if you change from standard tube lighting to LED lighting, the savings from that are both financially and environmentally are huge. So I put together a project that would transform all of my campuses, and we were taking out 9,000 lights and changing them for LED lighting. Now, from a financial point of view, the payback period for that is 2.5 to 3 years from an initial capital outlay. So what we did is we tried to get management to understand, so senior management, sort of chief exec level, that when you're investing in this type of technology, the return on investment is very quick. So we had to sort of, because sometimes the understanding at senior management level isn't quite as good as if you're an estates professional or an environmental into environmental issues. It's getting a business case that is simple to understand. So you look at the financial side of things. So the project I'm leading on will save somewhere in the region of 1.1 million kilowatt hours and £215,000 a year for my organisation. Taking that one step further, if you then look at the carbon reduction side of things, because the government's agenda around carbon reduction is quite heavy, especially in the public sector, I was looking at saving somewhere in the region of 320 tonnes of carbon per annum just from this one project. And then there's the environmental, moral side of it, where students nowadays have a lot higher environmental awareness of what their previous generation used to have, and actually trying to promote that environmental, those environmental credentials means that you're attracting students to your organisation because they think that you're taking that type of thing seriously. So what we've also done is we've removed all of the single-use plastics and going for electric vehicles and looking at biomass boilers to try and hit as many of the environmental savings both from a carbon point of view and an energy point of view as we possibly can. So the biggest tip I had was actually trying to get that information to the senior management team in a business case that they would understand. So I mean, that's the big insight.
I think that's definitely something that the college has sort of taken this opportunity to put in sustainable measures that they may have had more difficulty putting in when students were in the buildings. So yeah, that's great. Sean, could we go to you next with your big insight?
Yeah, so my big insight is on the bounce back of nature, which I'm contractually obligated to talk about from the WWF. But it's the kind of point that's been raised by most companies and most governments. They've all been focused on this. They now see the value and are talking about it more than we've ever seen. And throughout lockdown, we've seen some wonderful stories about the resilience of nature. Even yesterday, I was reading about an endangered seahorse species in the UK, spotted for the first time in years. That sounds very lovey-dovey. That is an incredibly big shift from what we once saw as corporate voices. We can't comprehend what that means really yet, but we're going to see that going forward, I think.
Yeah, I think we've definitely seen so many stories to do with nature and the environment and how sort of a pause in human activity has really helped nature thrive. So yeah, thank you very much. And lastly, Fiona, what's your sort of main insight?
So I think my main sort of takeaway from it is that people can now see what 2050 needs to look like. Definitely. So I think there's a number of different aspects and things that have happened. Clearly, we've been working in the NHS during COVID. It's been testing, and I'm sure will continue to be. But I think previously, talking about climate change and 2050, it was kind of a bit ethereal. People couldn't really grasp the tangible benefits, and especially on items like air pollution, you just have to physically look at London at the moment and all the capital cities to figure out this is how it needs to be. And I think that's reflected in a lot of the medical stats as well. So for me, it's been a massive opportunity to show people something tangible that they will remember within their lifetime to make the changes that they require to within their lifetime as well.
Great. Yeah, I think air quality is a big one because it's so drastically improved since all of this. And I think it's definitely one of those things that's made people wake up to sustainability and climate change. So yeah, definitely. So I think let's go on to the questions. So the first question I have here is, what will coronavirus mean for UK emissions and the net zero target? So Sean, could I start with you on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll engage with the elephant in the room, obviously, and just say first things first, we don't see it as an opportunity. it's a pandemic. We are talking, we've got people from the NHS on the line as well, and I'm very conscious to acknowledge the seriousness of the situation. The emission reductions we have seen during COVID won't continue. It was an artificial way to make reductions that have happened through a total shutdown. That's not what we campaign for, and that's not what we want to see happen to our economy. We want to make sure it's done through meaningful change. And we are seeing a return to pre-COVID air quality levels already in places like China, and we're expecting to see similar returns in other countries. So that's not a cheery way to start it, but it's, you know, we'll get going. We're seeing a forecast already of an 8% reduction in global emissions this year, which sounds great, but we need to see 7.6% every year over the next decade if we want to achieve our 1.5 degree targets. So we have to acknowledge what it was. It wasn't necessarily the thing that people in the papers were saying, that it was this wonderful thing to change the world, but it was a moment where we stopped to reassess our values as people and as businesses. We got to decide what we want to be, and that's where the conversation around sustainability and sustainable businesses needs to be, and where it's more valuable than ever.
Yeah, I think that's really important to note. I mean, there's been multiple studies done where there's articles and global leaders saying, you know, we can't go back to business as usual, and there needs to be a change and jump forward with this, not just going back. Fiona, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, so I think that I think Sean's right. I think that, you know, it has been a pandemic. I think that in itself is a warning. I think some of the things that will happen on the back of that, clearly there's going to be a mass impact on the economy, and there is already talks and predictions of a lot of recession, and I think that's something that's unavoidable, given the growth hasn't been there for the first 1 and probably 2 quarters of this year. But I think that the opportunities for emission reduction come in how we approach the recovery. So clearly we need to stimulate the economy again, but that can be done into green business. And, you know, I think if the government actually focused where the money goes in the recovery, we could come out of it a lot more sustainably in the long term. So I think that would be, yeah, I think that clearly it's great now. I think people are quick to forget when we were having discussion about 2020 just before the session started, and at the beginning of the years we had wildfires in Australia. I think most of us have actually forgotten about that. They were catastrophic, and you know, it's people return very quickly to normal or the new normal. So I think that we just need to be very mindful about how each of us in our own organisations conduct ourselves and what we push in the recovery. I think that that's where a lot of the opportunity is provided.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a strategy that sort of is built around recovering from coronavirus and lockdown, I think sustainability needs to be the core of that. And it needs to be embedded in a way that it can't be forgotten about, and it is an action that's solid and has to be monitored and followed. Otherwise, as you say, it might get lost along the way. Marcus, do you have anything to add here?
Well, the only thing I was going to say is I think people's habits will also change. I mean, in this we're still in the middle of a pandemic, and I don't see it going anywhere for, you know, the short to medium term. So people will get used to working from home, and it's then, I think it's down to the organisations to try and empower those people at home to improve their own sustainability there as well. When we only look at it from the office point of view, which is where my expertise comes in, but if you can then try and pass on some of that to the home. I mean, if you look at the amount of water that's been used, because they're not in the offices and they don't have the water reduction technology that is standard in most office places now, that there's been the possibility of a drought coming along during the summer because of the increase in water that we're using. So I think you need to look at it in its totality and not just from an economic point of view or an office-based point of view, but it's also changing individuals' behaviours as well.
Yeah, I suppose a good question that leads on from that is sort of how can we engage with staff, individuals and customers, other stakeholders that in order to embed sustainability into their behaviours and values and continue to do so? Could you answer that, Marcus?
Who's that to?
I'm sort of sitting there going, well, where's that coming from? I think that, again, going back to what I was saying, that with regards to organisations, I think I don't like the word badge, but the ability to show that you have those environmental credentials is important, not just to your customers, but for us, stakeholders are the Department for Education and Skills, other colleges, students. I even go down as far as being able to trace all my food back and the traceability of food and try and make it as local as possible. All of those things fall into your sort of environmental and sustainability plans so that you can show and evidence that you can do that. So that's where it's so that people have the confidence in you as an organisation that you are trying your best for not only the environment, but your local community and humanity as a whole.
Yeah, I think having that transparency between the actions that an organisation is doing with their stakeholders really helps make the plan alive, and gives it an image that people can engage with and take those behaviours on board as well. I was
also going to say it's also with your procurement practices as well. You want to embed that into your procurement. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in over there.
Oh no, it's fine. No, definitely. I think yeah, that's great. Sean, could I pass on to you for that one?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest things we want to see happen is for companies to be open. I know that sounds like a self-help book, but actually inviting conversation and giving people the opportunity to take part in the strategy is an extremely valuable way of operating. It brings them with you, which limits risk to criticism later on, and it makes for a happy workforce. In the WWF, we get shown everything all the way through from our procurement. We actually have talks where I'm a climate change person, but I'm listening to our procurement guys talk about everything. We share everything, and it really creates an amazing working culture where now you can't drag us away from the office because we care so much about it. We are part of that change that we want to see.
Yeah, I think during this time we've seen more collaboration and more demand for collaboration internally and between organisations as well, and it's something I think has been needed for a long time, and hopefully it will continue afterwards. So yeah, definitely. And Fiona, from an NHS perspective, how do you think this engagement with staff might work going forwards with sustainability?
So I think going back to a point that Marcus made right at the beginning, so sustainability has, especially a lot of the more simple engineering measures and some of the more difficult behavioural measures have good operational cost savings. I think all organisations will really be looking to reduce their operational costs as they get back into business as usual. That will be a result of what's happened and what will happen to the economy. I think that's kind of something that's really fundamental, and we should use that as an opportunity, I think, to push all of the really quick payback measures like your LED lighting and decarbonising the heating. I think that from an NHS perspective, there's going to be a lot of changes, and there's a lot of things that we can do different in our operating models. Clearly, we haven't been having people come into hospitals, but the long-term plan, if you look at that sets out a reduction of 1/3 of outpatient appointments. So as we flow back into business as usual, I think there's a lot of opportunity to engage staff in how we make those business as usual changes in a similar way to the working from home. And then I think that there are things that staff are really passionate about. Clearly, PPE has been one of those things, and we're now developing reusable PPE. We've got, I think, I don't know how formal this is, so we've got a number of reusable items coming in through, and we've done that through working with our supply chain and some people who you probably wouldn't think in the private sector to develop those things. But I think one of the things that's really going to resonate and stay with people is people's mental health and well-being. And I think in the recovery process, one of the things that organisations will have to consider the most is the mental health and well-being of their staff. And how we link that to sustainability is quite easy. Green space, talking to people, having the ability to do that. I think is something that we can really embed, and certainly in the NHS we'll look to improve the biodiversity of a lot of our sites because of that.
Yeah, okay, that's great. I've got a few questions that have come in. Let me just get onto that. So what consumer trends are around sustainability are we seeing and expecting to emerge post-lockdown? Fiona, could we go with you for that one?
Consumer trends, okay. So it's interesting. People have really reconnected, I think, with a lot of more old school hobbies, I'm going to say. You know, knitting, making their own clothes, making their own face masks. We've certainly seen that. I think there's a lot of, I think the way that we buy probably won't fundamentally change initially, but potentially we might think twice about the way we buy and what we do to the environment. I think it's hard to know really. We had a conversation the other day about single-use plastics. So the NHS has been on a big drive to get rid of single-use plastics, especially in its catering facilities. And that obviously comes off the back of the fact that plastics are a massive pollutant. And we were talking about, well, now will everybody go back to single-use cups? Actually, probably. But are there other things that we would have spent a lot of time doing, such as reusable gowns or disposable curtains, or the things that we use in the NHS quite considerably, actually, that we could actually advance, so we could use it to advance. I think I would like to think that people would think a little bit more about the planet now. I think people have reconnected, as Sean said, they've really reconnected with the environment. And I think that people will be a little bit more mindful of that going forward. I hope that some of the big financiers will look at the opportunity to divest away from fossil fuels, to really invest significantly in green energy and renewable energy. I think that's a big sector that could help the recovery. So I don't have a crystal ball of consumer trends, but I think there's as much opportunity, but they may be in other areas that we haven't been focusing on previously.
Yeah. There's actually a good point on that as well made on, it's shifted our consumption patterns away from the office into the home, which we mentioned, but that also means on delivery shopping, concentration of retail from some of the small firms that we would use into the biggest firms. Now we're using Amazon and Tesco and online shopping. That's a lot easier. I'm pretty sure my doorbell went off a minute ago and you could hear my Amazon delivery, one of many that have been happening. But this is an initial thing that will actually peter out, we think. So the first focus that we'll see people doing is on behavior that keeps them safe. And that's with the cups they use. They don't want to get the germs transmitted. But actually we're learning that people are prepared to make big changes, and people believe life will go back to before. They won't, or they don't believe it will go back to before. They want to take these further. Those hobbies have been wonderful for mental health and wonderful for engaging in a new way. And yeah, once we get through the scary part, I think you're going to see a huge behaviour shift.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I know there are all these ambitions out there that we hope that will happen, but what do you guys think are sort of the main barriers that we could face in implementing those changes? I know sort of a big one that might come up is sort of funding and finances. But as well as that, what do you think could sort of be a big limitation there? Marcus, could I start with you on that one?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think people's psychology. So again, going back to the way people feeling safe. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I was going to jump in on the earlier question and say that I'm having to increase the amount I normally clean, and my consumption of hand soap and sanitizer. I was never a great person at buying hand sanitizer. Now I'm buying 90 gallons at a time. But I mean, people's attitudes and the psychology of people and people's behaviour is what's going to change and drive things. I mean, even down to For me, I've had to put social distance signage on every 2 meters on my floor so that people feel as though they're safe. So the drive is going to be that if people feel safe about something, then they're more likely to do it.
Yeah.
And it may not necessarily always be something you think about, but you then need to think about, again, going back to the mental health of people and the psychology, and everybody's just been put on pause for 3 months.
Yeah. I think it's definitely sort of important to appreciate the current situation and how people's behaviours have changed, and work alongside that to, as you say, help with implementing change.
No, exactly. So I mean, it's companies are going to have to adapt. Everybody's going to have to adapt to what we now classify as the new normal. Now, government likes to try and turn around and say 12 to 18 months we're going to have a vaccine. Well, maybe not. This may be 3-5 years. So what becomes the new normal will become the normal. They say behavioural science says after 20 times that becomes a habit. What's going to happen after 20 months?
Yeah, I think one of the statements that I've seen actually is about sort of we cannot socially distance from climate change, and I think it's a really good image of sort of saying how we need climate action and we need to build resilience, because otherwise, you know, we can sort of separate ourselves from this pandemic, but we can't hide away from climate change. So Sean, do you have anything to add to that comment?
Yeah, no, it's a great, I think that was Mark Carney, wasn't it? It's a great little line.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's completely true, and we've taken this time to, it's a practice run as well. I've heard it referred to as, it takes, you know, a horrible pandemic to teach us where we need to fix our situation. Our system has been exposed and we've seen these issues. So we have practical applications now to do work, but again, feeding through on people. There's a really cool, there's a recent poll done by Ipsos Mori that showed 65% of people think climate should be prioritized in economic recovery from COVID. That's, and again, it's an insane kind of shift. Hopefully that will stay in people's psyche after the event has calmed and gone back to normal. But yeah, no, it is absolutely, it's a big shift, sorry.
No, definitely. Fiona, for NHS, we've had a question here about sort of what about the increase in the use of single-use products such as masks, gloves, and I know you sort of touched upon earlier the introduction of reusable PPE, but obviously it's been heightened, and do you think sort of what will the barriers be going forward there?
I think it goes back to people feeling safe. Yeah, the PPE and even social distancing, they can probably be significant. So the physical barrier that you're creating between you and somebody else, I think, and the safety that you feel having those items. I think that there will be some things that will stick with people. Clearly, this pandemic is global, and it is, you know, it's claimed a lot of lives. It is one of a number of pandemics that's happened over the last few years, and the climate scientists predict that there will be many more. I think that we have to look at how we operate. So some of the things around barrier nursing clearly are essential, and it's essential that we keep people safe when they're doing their jobs, when they're trying to help other people. But we are doing this webinar remotely, and I don't think that there's any physical reason why we need to move back to the kind of real estate position that we were in before. However, what does that mean for people, and also for the kind of socialisation of people? And I think there's a number of different things that play into that. Clearly, there has been a significant increase in PPE and single-use items. It is the same with all kind of pandemics and with all kind of infectious disease in general, actually, which we deal with quite a lot. I think infection prevention control won't actually be a barrier. I think that they're part of the people who are really pushing to get more sustainable kind of practices and processes in place. you know, and at the beginning of this, I personally was very surprised that the government had to tell people to wash their hands. I think that's pretty shocking. But you know, if things like that really stay, then that's great, and that can prevent some of those single-use items being needed in areas where, when this has left as the pandemic that it is, that perhaps we can go back to some of the areas not needing to use as much in terms of single-use items as they did before.
Great. No, I think it's definitely one of those things that a lot of people working in sustainability within the NHS are sort of concerned about. So yeah, and I think going forward there will be more innovation during times like this. You know, people are thinking of new ways of working and new ways of doing things. But I suppose one sort of question that has come up a few times is sort of how can we gain senior level buy-in and build business cases to encourage these green initiatives across the business. So Sean, could I go to you first on that one?
You could. There's about a million ways I could answer this as well. It's a really interesting. We could do a whole webinar on this. But if you want to get senior level buy-in, first things first is you need to show them the value to the company, and setting up a green team. It's the simplest and most effective way to do this at a smaller level. You get a group of staff, so you say, we have now X many people in our staff working on this, and they'll see it as a part of the business that, okay, we've got a group of, you know, internal dissidents who want to change this.
Yeah.
Then you put together the business cases. And yeah, how do you do that? You show the costs. So you kind of look at old behavior versus new. How much were we spending on? It sounds very basic in some places, but actually it works. I used to work in a media company where I literally walked around pointing at the light bulbs, counted the amount of light bulbs we had, and did a quick bit of math. And they actually listened to that coming from me in the green team. And then that went to our facilities guys. I'm sure they hated me, but those kinds of conversations at like within different departments actually do have a huge potential for change within a business.
Yeah. And Marcus, you've sort of recently undertaken quite a few initiatives and estates improvements. Is there anything that you could sort of add on your approach?
Well, as I said, I mean, funny enough, my introduction was around this, and it's the whole management buy-in is trying to simplify, try and make it as simple as possible, but showing what the benefits are. So you got to understand, most people at senior management level, especially in sort of education, haven't come through an environmental background or even a facilities background. They're academics, and they'll be very good at their specific subjects or whatever else. So if you're trying to bring them along, it's showing them, as I said, I always sell it from a number of different points. So you do it financial, you do it, you know, environmental, you do it moral, and you do, you know, cost benefit analysis at the end of it, and you go, this is where you wrap it all up and go, look, you can't lose on this. Yeah. And as long as you've done your research, as long as you've sort of go, you know, I mean, for me, it's easy because of the size that I'm throwing around. I mean, if you talk about 1.1 million kilowatt hours of energy, people go, that's quite a lot. And even if you sort of like take it to where they live in their home, they go, you know, you can't even comprehend it. So it's actually making it as simple for them to understand as possible, while showing all the benefits, and the benefits in sustainable and in environmental sort of technology and how far it's come along are massive now, and it's a very easy win to sell.
Definitely. And Fiona, for NHS organisations, I suppose, how can you sort of communicate the benefits of sustainability that aren't necessarily driven by the financial savings?
Yeah, so I think the thing that I would say to everyone in the NHS is, and in fact probably every business, is this is about resilience. So climate change is about resilience, ultimately, us as a resilient population, the planet. And COVID has just shone a light on resilience of systems, the economy, during certain measures being put in place. So I think I would be telling them to sort of like look at your business, look what it is that you need to build resilience, and to frame all of your sort of climate change work in terms of resilience. And that is resilience of buildings, resilience of people, resilience of operations. And I think if you do that, there are very few CEOs who would turn around and disagree. And in fact, I think that this is an opportune time to do that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good way of thinking about it. And I think a lot of people do struggle to sort of get their case across when there isn't necessarily that obvious financial benefit. So
I would say that it's not always about financial. I mean, you can sell it as stakeholder. So if you engage with stakeholders, you're trying to sort of show your credentials to them, which I went back to earlier. It is also you've got to sell it on the moral side of things as well, and say that the planet, if the planet's not around, we're not going to be around. So you need to build this sustainability if you can do it. Now it's more difficult for smaller organisations who don't have the finances to do it, but you still have an obligation as a human being to try and do what you can to try and protect your own habitat. And if you can't understand that point, then you probably shouldn't be a chief exec anyway.
I love it.
And I suppose for Sean, I've got a question here about sort of how has this affected conservation efforts? And I know we sort of spoke about ecotourism before, and obviously a lot of that's been put on hold. So I wondered if you could just give some insights into this.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about business, we assume the kind of businesses we're used to seeing, which is offices and commuting and tubes. But actually, our work at WWF involves multiple conservation projects across the globe, which have all faced their own challenges. We have what we call our triple challenge is to find the balance between climate, people, and nature, and people is a key pillar in that. We want to make sure these people have ecotourism is massively important for, I can't even count the amount of communities across the globe that would, live and thrive on this. And it's been really, really difficult for them, especially even the ones we're trying to enable. There's been a huge disruption, let's say, in the network. It's much harder to monitor land grabbing and illegal poaching at the moment. We're seeing spikes in poaching of large cats in Latin America and rhinos in Africa. We're seeing species that were vulnerable to COVID-19. Mountain gorillas were actually susceptible, but thankfully none have been affected. Our measures we put in place. We're only finding these things out now. We have a report coming out on the 17th, which goes through this in more detail. And we're hoping to put a bit more colour to it. But the key takeaway throughout the whole thing is this situation has actually highlighted the need for conservation. To prevent future pandemics like this, we need to stop destroying our natural world. Around 70% of emerging infectious diseases have come from animals, and it's that human-wildlife conflict. When we destroy natural habitats like the Amazon, we force wildlife and humans together, and that increases our risk of infection, which can shut down the world.
Yeah, I think it's really important for nature to sort of to take sort of keep in mind nature and everything that we do, and understand the link between humans and the environment, because when people start doing that, they'll be more mindful of their behaviours. So I suppose getting near the end of the webinar now, so to sort of summarise and round off, I'd just like to ask you guys if you could give a final sort of closing statement or your main takeaway from some of the things that we've spoken about today, potentially to do with sort of how at an individual level within their organisation they can make change into this sort of green recovery that we've been speaking about. So Fiona, could I start with you on that one?
Sure. So I think my key takeaway for anybody actually would be that anything's possible now. The rule book's just been ripped up. So, if you had an idea that you didn't think would really fly before, just write it down and put it in front of somebody. Be really gutsy about what you go for, and really try and extend what you do. This is absolutely the time to kind of, the flash in the pan type thing, or the big light bulb idea is probably a better metaphor, isn't it? But really, just just really go for it. I think that your senior leaders will be coming to you to ask you what to do. I think we've all personally been affected, and people have been affected in different ways. And I think that organisations will really look to their staff and sort of society in general for the solutions to how we get out of this. So I think if there's a really strong voice from every person in every organisation that we should be doing something around climate change, then that is really powerful.
Yeah, definitely. And Sean, could we go to you next?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say be vocal. That sounds like a silly thing to say, but we need businesses taking serious action, and we need them to be seen to be taking serious action. Government can be conservative if they don't want to legislate for fear of over-regulation. So we want leaders to step up and say, we're doing this. This is what's happening. You don't have to be afraid of limiting us. We're actually taking this and running with it. We see the solution to climate change is in policy change. But in order to help that, we need behaviour change, and we need businesses pushing that forward.
Perfect. And Marcus, what's your sort of takeaway message for everyone?
I was going to say, everybody's looked at COVID as we started as the elephant in the room, but to spin it round, it's become a kind of opportunity for everybody to reassess where they are, not just businesses, but people. I think there's going to be a massive shift away from, the office environment to more home working, because people can see the benefits of it. Commuting is an horrendous thing to do, especially if you're in London and trying to get on a tube. That's a thing of the past now. So businesses need to not only look at the sustainability of their business model, but the sustainability of their staff, and actually trying to make sure that you're trying to evolve. Yeah, this is a time that you can sit here and go, right, this has been horrendous for the country, for the planet. How do we now try and heal some of that through sustainability initiatives, through staff welfare initiatives, through whatever we can do to try and actually now help where we used to destroy?
Definitely. And I think sort of at the minute more people are adapting more than probably they would normally, and more willing to, in a way, because we've been forced, but it just proves that. And I think as well, when we're sort of building strategies and sort of deciding where we're going to go forwards with this, it's making the plan individual to everyone. And I think sort of everyone will have their preference and what works for them when changing their behaviours to be more sustainable. So I think that is about all the time we have for questions and everything. So thank you all for joining us, and a big thank you from ETL to our panel for giving some great insights and taking the time out of their day to be here today as well. So we will send out highlights from this session to all attendees, and a link to access the recording as well. So if anyone has any outstanding questions, please feel free to get in contact with ETL on sustainability@etl.co.uk or on our LinkedIn, and we're happy to answer any questions. But enjoy the rest of the day and stay safe, and thank you all again. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.